My parents put me in foster care when I was 9. They kept my twin sister. Mom told the social worker she is the difficult one. Her sister has a future. For years, they told everyone I ran away. Years later, they saw me on national TV. Suddenly, they wanted me back. I smiled and said, "Of course, meet the woman who raised me." When she walked in wearing her Child Protective Services badge, my mom dropped her glass. That is her. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family threw you away. I am Maya Washington. I am 28 years old and I am currently an executive producer and investigative journalist for a major television network. As I sit in my living room today, surrounded by the life I built entirely on my own, the memories of my childhood still play in my mind like a high-definition movie. Growing up in a wealthy African-American neighborhood in Chicago, my family was obsessed with appearances. My parents, Patricia and Marcus Washington, were completely consumed by status wealth and the perfect family image. They wanted daughters who could be molded into perfect little trophies to show off at their high society galas. My twin sister, Mia, fit that mold flawlessly. She was compliant, obsessed with pageants, and perfectly willing to be the smiling doll my parents wanted. I was different. I asked too many questions. I noticed the cracks in their perfect facade. I saw my father taking hushed phone calls late at night, and my mother making frantic attempts to cover up their mounting debts with more designer clothes. Because I refused to be a silent prop, I became the problem. The tension in our sprawling brick house was a living, breathing thing. Patricia never missed a chance to compare us. She would buy Mia expensive silk dresses and hand me the clearance rack leftovers. She would praise Mia at every turn while completely ignoring my academic awards. But the ultimate betrayal happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when we were 9 years old. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, watching my mother pack my clothes into black trash bags. She did not even give me a suitcase. When the social worker arrived, I stood in the grand foyer of our home clinging to my only winter jacket. Patricia did not shed a single tear. She looked the social worker dead in the eye and delivered the sentence that would echo in my mind for the next 19 years. She is the difficult one. Her sister has a future. We simply cannot let her ruin Maya and her chances. Marcus stood right next to her, adjusting his expensive tie, completely silent. He let his own flesh and blood be dragged out the front door because I was an inconvenience to his pristine public image. As the social worker drove me away, I looked back and saw Maya standing in the window, wearing a brand new pageant dress, watching me leave without a single trace of emotion. From that day on, Patricia and Marcus spun a masterful web of lies. They told their affluent friends, their business partners, and our extended family that I was a troubled, rebellious child who had violently run away from home. They played the role of the heartbroken, tragic parents perfectly. They garnered sympathy and support, while I was bounced around the foster care system carrying the heavy label of an unwanted child. But they severely underestimated me. The foster care system was brutal, a maze of temporary beds and indifferent faces. That was until I met Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a seasoned Child Protective Services worker, a strong, brilliant African-American woman who saw right through the files and the labels. She saw a traumatized little girl who just needed a fighting chance. Sarah eventually fostered me and later legally adopted me. She became my real mother. She taught me how to channel my anger into ambition. She taught me that my voice was a weapon and my mind was a fortress. While Patricia and Marcus were busy grooming Mia to marry Connor Sterling, a white heir to a massive corporate fortune, I was working 3 jobs to put myself through broadcasting school. I climbed the grueling ladder of journalism. I started as an unpaid intern, fetching coffee and logging tapes late into the night. I worked my way up to researcher, then reporter, and finally to executive producer. I specialized in exposing financial fraud and corporate corruption. I built my career on finding the truth and dragging it into the light. I bought my own property, established my own wealth, and created an impenetrable life. I never looked back at the Washington family, and they certainly never looked for me. That all changed 2 weeks ago. My network launched a massive promotional campaign for my new primetime investigative special. My face was plastered across national television, glowing on billboards, and featured in major magazine spreads. I was introduced as Maya Washington, the fierce new powerhouse of investigative journalism. Patricia and Marcus must have been sitting in their living room when the commercial aired. I can only imagine the shock that ripped through them when they realized the disposable daughter they threw away was now a national television executive. The hypocrisy was immediate and nauseating. Within 48 hours, my network office received a frantic phone call. It was Patricia crying actual tears, playing the role of the desperate mother who had finally found her lost child. She claimed they had spent 19 years agonizing over my disappearance. She claimed they had hired private investigators and prayed every night for my safe return. The sheer audacity of her lies made my blood run cold. But I did not hang up. I did not yell. I realized this was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. I smiled into the phone and told her I would love to reunite. We arranged to meet at an exclusive, ridiculously expensive restaurant downtown. I arrived early and sat at the reserved table sipping sparkling water, completely composed. Patricia and Marcus rushed in a few minutes later. They were practically tripping over themselves to play the loving parents. Patricia tried to grab my hands, weeping about how beautiful I looked, how much she missed me, how my success was a testament to the Washington family resilience. Marcus ordered the most expensive champagne on the menu, boasting to the waiter about his brilliant daughter. They talked for 20 minutes, rewriting history, painting themselves as the victims of a tragic misunderstanding. I let them talk. I let them dig their own graves with every fake tear and every hollow compliment. Then I casually mentioned that I did not come alone. I told them I wanted them to meet the woman who had actually raised me, the woman who took me in after I miraculously ran away at 9 years old. The restaurant doors opened and Sarah Jenkins walked in. She looked immaculate in a tailored suit, her posture commanding absolute respect. But it was not just her presence that froze the air in the room. Pinned clearly to her lapel was her old Child Protective Services badge, right next to her shiny new credential as the state financial auditor. Patricia was mid-sentence, raising her crystal wine glass for a toast to our reunited family. She looked up and locked eyes with Sarah. The recognition was instantaneous. This was the exact same woman Patricia had handed me over to 19 years ago. The exact same woman who had heard her call me a difficult child with no future. The color completely drained from Patricia's face. Her fingers went limp. The heavy crystal wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered violently against the marble floor, splashing expensive champagne everywhere. "That is her," Patricia gasped, her voice trembling with raw panic. Marcus choked on his breath, his eyes darting toward the exits like a trapped animal. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, looking at their terrified faces. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I just smiled. "Yes, Mom, this is her. The woman who gave me the future you tried to destroy." I stood up, dropped a $100 bill on the table to cover their broken glass, and walked out with Sarah, leaving them sitting in a puddle of their own shattered lies. But that was just the appetizer. The real main course happened this morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the final edits for my upcoming broadcast when the heavy double doors of my studio office were violently pushed open. Patricia and Marcus stormed into my workspace, completely bypassing my security desk. Their faces were red with a mixture of terror and fury. The fake loving parents from the restaurant were entirely gone. In their place stood the real Washingtons, desperate, cornered, and ready to fight. Patricia pushed past the heavy glass doors of my studio office, her heels clicking frantically against the polished hardwood floor. She wore a tailored emerald green suit that screamed old money, but the slight fraying at the cuffs told a different story. Marcus trailed right behind her, his posture stiff, trying to project the image of a wealthy patriarch despite the sweat visibly glistening on his forehead. They had bypassed my security desk entirely, leveraging the sheer arrogance that only the Washington family possessed. My baby Patricia cried out, throwing her arms open wide. Her voice was a theatrical wail perfectly pitched to draw the attention of my production assistants, researchers, and camera crew who were standing by the editing bays. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing two perfectly timed tears to stream down her heavily powdered cheeks. "We finally found you. My beautiful daughter, you are finally home." She lunged forward entirely, expecting me to fall into her embrace to play the role of the weeping, grateful child reuniting with her long-lost family in front of my entire staff. I did not move a single muscle until she was exactly 1 foot away. Then I took one deliberate, calculated step backward. Patricia stumbled slightly, her arms grasping empty air. Her eyes snapped open. The fake maternal warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of the cold, calculating woman I remembered so vividly from my childhood. The entire studio fell dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the servers and the distant traffic of downtown Chicago outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone was watching. "We do not need to perform for my staff." "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "They already know exactly who you are and exactly what you did to me 19 years ago. Save the tears. You are wasting my expensive production time." Marcus stepped up, puffing out his chest, trying to salvage the situation with forced authority. "Now you listen here, Maya. That is no way to speak to your mother. We have spent nearly 2 decades searching for you. We hired private investigators. We prayed every single night. You owe us some respect." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The absolute audacity of this man was almost impressive. "You hired private investigators?" I asked, my tone dripping with pure sarcasm. "That is fascinating, Marcus. Because public records show you spent the last 19 years funneling every spare dollar into Maya and her pageant coaches, her designer wardrobes, and eventually her lavish wedding to Connor Sterling. You did not spend a single dime looking for me. You spent 19 years pretending I was a troubled runaway who broke your hearts so you could play the victims at your country club dinners." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing with indignation, but I did not give her the chance. I reached inside my tailored blazer and pulled out a crisp, leather-bound checkbook. The unmistakable sound of thick paper tearing cut through the heavy silence of the room. "I know exactly why you are here today," I said, uncapping my solid gold fountain pen. "It has absolutely nothing to do with a miraculous family reunion. It has everything to do with the fact that Marcus Washington Real Estate is currently drowning. You are exactly $200,000 in the red, Marcus. You have defaulted on 3 commercial loans in the past 4 months alone. The bank is preparing to seize this very suit you are wearing." Marcus physically recoiled, his jaw dropped, and the patriarchal bravado completely drained from his body. He looked at Patricia in sheer panic, silently asking how I could possibly know the intimate, highly guarded details of his failing business empire. You see, I continued smoothly writing out the figures on the check, the nib of my pen scratching loudly against the paper. "When you run a national investigative journalism department, accessing public financial records is child play. I know about the missed mortgage payments on the summer house. I know about the desperate late-night calls to high-interest lenders. I know that Connor Sterling cut off your monthly allowance because he is completely tired of funding your sinking ship." Patricia swallowed hard, her eyes glued to the pen moving across the paper. The maternal act was entirely gone now. In its place was the naked, undeniable greed I knew so well. The desperation was radiating off them both in waves. As I wrote the final zeros, a memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. The damp, sterile smell of the foster care agency waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Patricia standing by the door wearing a pristine white coat, looking at the social worker with absolute, unfiltered disdain. She is the difficult one. Her sister has a future. We simply cannot let her ruin Maya and her chances. That sentence had burned in my brain for 19 years. It was the relentless fuel that kept me awake studying until dawn in cramped, freezing apartments. It was the roaring fire that pushed me to take on double shifts, to fight for every single promotion, to claw my way to the top of a brutally competitive industry. They threw me away like garbage because they genuinely thought I was worthless. They looked at a 9-year-old girl and decided she was a liability. Now the difficult one was standing in a penthouse office, holding the literal keys to their survival. I tore the check from the booklet and held it up between my index and middle fingers. The bright blue ink spelling out $200,000 caught the studio lights. The amount was life-changing for them, but it was just a fraction of the wealth I had built completely on my own. "You came here hoping to guilt-trip a vulnerable girl into giving you a handout," I said, looking straight into Patricia's wide, desperate eyes. "You thought you could walk in here, shed a few fake tears, and I would be so desperate for your love and validation that I would just hand over my hard-earned money without a second thought. You were wrong about the vulnerable girl part, but you were right about the money." I extended my arm, holding the check out toward them, letting it flutter slightly in the air conditioning current. "I will pay off your entire debt, Marcus. I will clear the loans that are suffocating you. I will save your precious public image so you can keep pretending you belong in high society with the Sterlings. I will give you this money today." Patricia let out a ragged, audible breath of relief. A greedy, triumphant smile began to form on her lips. She truly believed her manipulation had worked. She genuinely thought that despite everything she had done, she still had control over me. She took a quick, eager step forward, her manicured hand reaching out to snatch the financial salvation from my grip. Marcus let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as he reached out right beside her, his eyes locked entirely on the money. Just as their trembling fingers brushed the edge of the paper, I snapped my wrist back, pulling the check entirely out of their reach. The sharp snap of the paper cutting through the air sounded louder than a gunshot in the silent studio. Patricia and Marcus both froze. Their hands remained suspended in the empty space where the check had been just a fraction of a second prior. The look of desperate greed on their faces slowly morphed into profound confusion, and then a rising tide of indignation. Marcus dropped his hand to his side, his jaw tightening as the reality of the power dynamic settled heavily onto his shoulders. Patricia let out a short, indignant breath, her eyes darting from the check safely tucked against my chest, up to my unwavering gaze. "You did not actually think it would be that easy, did you?" I asked softly, letting the silence stretch around my words. "You did not honestly believe you could walk into my place of business, shed exactly 2 tears, and walk out with $250,000, no questions asked." "We are your family, Maya," Patricia said, her voice dropping the theatrical wail and adopting a sharp defensive edge. "We came here to find our daughter. The money is just a gesture of good faith, a way to help us rebuild our lives together." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the production floor. A gesture of good faith from the difficult one. I said, letting the words roll off my tongue. The difficult one who would ruin Mia and her bright future. "Do you remember saying that, Patricia?" "Because I remember. I remember the exact tone of your voice. I remember the white coat you wore. I remember the way you looked at the social worker like she was taking out your trash." Patricia flinched. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another masterful web of lies, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Do not insult my intelligence by denying it," I continued. "We are far past the point of pretending. You are here because Marcus Washington Real Estate is bleeding cash, and you are terrified of losing your country club memberships. I have the money you desperately need, but this is not a charity. This is a transaction. And like any good transaction, there are terms and conditions." Marcus stepped forward, his business instincts finally overriding his panic. He adjusted his expensive yet slightly outdated tie. He looked at me not as a lost daughter, but as a hostile negotiator across a boardroom table. "What are your terms?" Marcus asked, his voice low and gravelly. "What exactly do you want from us?" I placed the checkbook flat on the surface of the nearest editing console. I smoothed my hand over the leather cover, enjoying the visible anticipation radiating from both of them. "I want a family reunion," I said smoothly. "A very public, very highly publicized family reunion. This Friday night, prime time. My network is airing a 2-hour special focusing on my life and my rise in the world of investigative journalism. I want you both there. I want Maya there. I want Connor Sterling there. The entire Washington family sitting on the plush white couches of my studio set under the bright lights in front of millions of viewers." Patricia frowned, her eyes narrowing as she tried to calculate the angle. "You want us on television?" she asked, a hint of genuine surprise breaking through her defensive posture. "You want to interview us?" "I do not just want to interview you, Patricia. I want to give you the platform of a lifetime," I said, walking slowly around the editing console, closing the distance between us just enough to make them uncomfortable. Think about the narrative. The heartbroken affluent parents who tragically lost their twin daughter to the harsh streets. The parents who never stopped looking, who kept an empty room waiting for her return. The miraculous reunion 19 years later. It is a ratings goldmine. I watched Patricia's eyes widen. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was a creature fueled by public perception. The thought of being featured on a national primetime broadcast playing the role of the tragic loving mother was an intoxicating proposition. It was the ultimate social currency. She could already imagine the phone calls from her wealthy friends, the sympathetic nods at her charity galas, the absolute validation of her perfect maternal image. "And for you, Marcus," I added, turning my attention to my father, "think about the business implications. The Washington family name cleared of any dark whispers, a public display of resilience and family unity. Investors love a good redemption story. They love a family that overcomes adversity. You sit on that stage, you hold your wife's hand, you shed a tear for the cameras, and your credit rating will practically fix itself. Plus, the moment the broadcast ends, I will hand you this check. Free and clear. $200,000 to wipe your slate clean." Marcus narrowed his eyes. The greed was warring with a deep instinctual caution. He was a shark who had survived in the real estate waters for decades, and he knew that prey did not willingly swim into the jaws of a predator without a reason. "Why would you do this?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with suspicion. "You just told us you know we abandoned you. You know exactly what we did. Why give us the money? Why give us the television exposure?" "What is the catch, Maya?" "Because I am a professional, Marcus." I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "I am an executive producer. I understand the value of a compelling story. My audience wants a heartwarming narrative. They want to see the prodigal daughter return. They want closure. I am willing to pay for that closure. You provide the emotional television moments, and I provide the financial rescue. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement." Patricia stepped closer to Marcus, her hand gripping his forearm. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Marcus," she whispered urgently, $200,000. We can pay off the commercial loans. We can stop the bank from seizing the properties. We just have to sit on a couch and answer a few questions. We can do this. We have played this part for 19 years. We know exactly what to say." Marcus looked at his wife, then looked at the checkbook resting on the console. The heavy silence in the studio felt suffocating. He was weighing the risks. He was trying to find the hidden trapdoor. But the pressure of his crumbling empire was too heavy. The looming threat of bankruptcy, of losing the mansion, of facing the mockery of his peers, it was all too much to bear. The difficult one held the key to his salvation. "Are you guaranteeing the money?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "The full amount immediately after the broadcast ends." I reached into my blazer pocket again and pulled out a legally binding contract I had my legal team draft that very morning. I tossed it onto the console next to the checkbook. "It is all in the contract, Marcus," I said. "A legally binding agreement. You and Patricia agree to a full, unedited live interview this Friday night. Maya and Connor must also be present and participate. You sign a standard non-disclosure agreement, preventing you from discussing the terms of our arrangement with any other media outlets. The moment the director calls cut on the live broadcast, the funds are electronically transferred to your primary business account. If you violate any terms of the broadcast, if you try to leave the stage, if you refuse to answer my questions, the contract is void." Marcus picked up the contract. His eyes scanned the dense legal text quickly. He was looking for loopholes, but my lawyers were the best in the industry. There were no loopholes. It was a straightforward transaction. Appearance for payment. "What kind of questions?" Patricia asked nervously. You will not try to embarrass us on national television, will you? I smiled, a soft, reassuring expression that I had perfected over years of interviewing hostile subjects. Why would I do that, Patricia? I want a happy reunion. I want to talk about the past, sure, but I want to focus on the future. I want to show the world how the Washington family perseveres. You just have to tell your truth. Marcus finished reading the document. He looked at the bottom line where the sum of $200,000 was clearly printed. The greed finally washed away the last remnants of his caution. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his own pen, and signed his name with a swift, aggressive motion. He handed the pen to Patricia. She did not even bother reading the document. She signed her name right next to his, her hand trembling slightly with anticipation. "We will be there," Marcus said, handing the contract back to me. "Friday night. We will bring Maya and Connor. We will give you your perfect television moment. Just make sure that money is ready." I slid the contract back into my pocket. "I will see you on Friday, Marcus. Do not be late. Hair and makeup call is at 6 in the evening sharp." Patricia tried one last time to salvage her maternal performance. She offered a weak, trembling smile. "I am so glad we found you, Maya. This is going to be wonderful. You will see, we are a family again." I did not reply. I simply stared at her until the smile completely faltered and fell off her face. They turned around and walked out of the studio, their footsteps echoing loudly against the hardwood floors. They walked faster than when they had entered, eager to escape the heavy atmosphere of the room, completely oblivious to the massive, inescapable trap they had just willingly walked into. As the heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, the studio remained utterly silent. My production assistants were staring at me, their eyes wide with unspoken questions. They knew my history. They knew exactly who those people were. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the busy Chicago streets below. I watched Marcus and Patricia emerge from the building and hurry toward their parked car. They were probably already arguing about what outfits to wear on national television. They were entirely focused on the money and the fame. They did not understand. They could not possibly comprehend the magnitude of what was coming. They thought they were walking onto a stage to play the victims. They thought they were going to spin their lies and cash a check. They did not realize that I had spent my entire adult life building a guillotine, and they had just eagerly volunteered to put their own heads on the block. The difficult one without a future. The unwanted child. They were about to learn exactly what kind of future I had built. And they were going to learn it in front of 30 million live viewers. "You do not get paid in advance," I said, sliding the check back into my breast pocket. My voice was dangerously low, leaving no room for negotiation. "You get this money the exact second the director yells cut on Friday night, not a minute before." Marcus stared at the spot where the check had been, his jaw working furiously. He looked like a man dying of thirst who had just watched someone pour a glass of water into the dirt. Patricia was breathing heavily, her chest heaving under her emerald suit. "What are the terms?" Marcus demanded, dropping the wealthy patriarch act completely. He was just a desperate debtor now. "It is simple," I replied. "Friday night. Prime time. A 2-hour live special on my network. You, Patricia Maya and her husband Connor, will sit on my stage. We are going to tell the world about our miraculous reunion. We are going to talk about how the Washington family persevered through the heartbreak of a runaway child. You get to play the tragic, loving parents in front of 30 million viewers. You get to clear your name, boost your public image, and walk away with $200,000 to save your failing real estate business." Patricia shifted her weight, her eyes darting back and forth. The prospect of national television was an intoxicating drug to a woman who lived for social climbing, but she was not entirely stupid. She sensed the danger. "What kind of questions will you ask?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to review the script. We cannot just go on live television blindly." "There is no script, Patricia." I smiled, letting a chilling warmth infuse my tone. "It is a raw, emotional interview. But you have nothing to worry about. You have spent 19 years telling everyone how much you missed me. Now you just have to say it to my face on camera." If you are telling the truth, it should be the easiest performance of your life. Marcus did not hesitate. His financial ruin was a ticking time bomb, and Friday night was his only defusal code. "We will do it," he snapped, shooting a warning glare at Patricia to keep her quiet. "We will be there, all four of us. Just have that check ready the moment we are done." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my desk drawer and slid it across the marble surface. A standard appearance release form. "Sign it," I commanded. "Both of you. Commit to Friday night, or I tear up the check right now and let the bank seize your mansion by Monday morning." Marcus grabbed the pen from my desk and scrawled his signature so hard he nearly tore the paper. Patricia hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes searching mine for any sign of a trap. She found nothing but cold, professional detachment. She took the pen from Marcus and signed her name. I took the document back, locking it securely in my drawer. "I will see you Friday. Do not be late." They practically ran out of the restaurant, Marcus gripping Patricia by the arm, dragging her toward the exit. I sat back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. They thought I was buying their act. They thought I was an insecure girl, desperate for her family approval, willing to pay for a fake reunion. They had absolutely no idea that I had just secured the star witnesses for their own public execution. The money was bait, and they had swallowed the hook whole. The next morning, the atmosphere in my downtown studio office was electric. I was at my desk by 6, reviewing production schedules and finalizing the lighting cues for Friday broadcast. The skyline of Chicago stretched out behind me, a testament to the heights I had climbed entirely on my own. At precisely 9 o'clock, my intercom buzzed. My assistant spoke, her voice laced with professional tension. "Maya, your sister Mia and a Mr. Connor Sterling are here. They do not have an appointment, but they are demanding to see you immediately." "Send them in," I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Maya walked in first. We shared the same face, the same eyes, the same height. But that was where the similarities abruptly ended. While I wore a sharp-tailored black blazer and trousers that commanded respect in a boardroom, Maya was draped in a suffocating layer of extreme wealth. She wore a pristine white Chanel tweed suit, diamond earrings that caught the morning light, and a massive engagement ring that she subtly angled so it would be the first thing I noticed. Connor Sterling followed closely behind her. He was tall, athletic, and possessed the specific brand of arrogant confidence that only comes from generational, untouchable white privilege. His family owned half the commercial real estate in the city. He looked around my corner office, his eyes dismissing the awards on my walls, evaluating my space as if he were deciding whether to buy the building and demolish it. "Maya." My twin sister cooed, her voice pitched unnaturally high. She rushed forward, opening her arms for a hug. I remained seated, my hands steepled on my desk. Maya stopped awkwardly, dropping her arms and smoothing her skirt. She let out a breathy, condescending laugh. "Still so serious, I see. Mom and Dad told us the crazy news last night. I just had to come see my long-lost sister for myself." "You saw me 19 years ago, Maya," I said evenly. "I was standing in the foyer with a trash bag full of clothes. You were wearing a pink pageant dress. I doubt your memory is that bad." Maya's smile faltered. The syrupy sweetness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, resentful glare. She hated me. She had always hated me for refusing to conform, and now she hated me for achieving a level of power she could never buy. Connor placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, physically moving her aside so he could address me directly. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply reached into his bespoke suit jacket, pulled out a thick, legally bound document, and slammed it down onto the center of my desk. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet office. "We are not here for a family reunion," Connor said, his voice flat and authoritative. "We are here to handle a massive liability." I glanced down at the document. The bold letters across the top read "Non-Disclosure and Defamation Agreement." "And what exactly is the liability, Connor?" I asked, meeting his arrogant gaze without blinking. "You are," he stated bluntly. "The Sterling family has spent a century building a flawless public reputation. My board of directors does not like surprises. My shareholders do not like unscripted television. Your parents might be desperate enough for a quick buck to sit on your stage and play your little game, but I am not. Maya is a sterling now. She represents my family. I do not do live television without total control of the narrative. I leaned forward slightly. You do not control my network, Connor. And you certainly do not control me. Connor let out a short, dismissive scoff. He leaned his knuckles on my desk, looming over me. Everyone has a price, Maya. Let us skip the righteous journalist routine. I know how the world works. You want viewers. You want drama. But you are not going to get it at my expense. He tapped a heavy gold signet ring against the thick legal document. This contract explicitly forbids you from asking any questions about Marcus Washington failing business. It forbids you from discussing Maya's personal life, her finances, or her charitable foundation. Most importantly, it completely prohibits you from making any negative, defamatory, or controversial statements about the Washington or Sterling families on live television. You will stick to a pre-approved script about a happy reunion, or you will not speak about us at all. I looked from Connor to Maya. My sister was standing tall, looking incredibly smug. She loved having a powerful man fight her battles. She loved feeling protected by a shield of impenetrable wealth. She genuinely believed I was intimidated. And if I refused to sign your gag order, I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Connor smirked, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a sleek black checkbook. He clicked a pen and began writing. Your father mentioned you offered him $200,000 for this little circus act. Connor said, his pen gliding across the paper. It is a cute gesture. A bit desperate, but cute. I understand you grew up in the system. You probably think that is a lot of money. But I deal in real capital. He ripped the check from the book and tossed it onto my desk right on top of the non-disclosure agreement. I looked down. $500,000. $500,000 payable immediately to Maya Washington. Sign the contract, Maya Connor ordered, crossing his arms over his chest. Take the $500,000. You get to keep your job, you get to boost your ratings with a boring family reunion, and you walk away significantly richer. You sign that paper right now, and you pledge absolute silence regarding anything that could damage our reputation. Maya stepped forward, resting her hands on the edge of my desk, leaning in close. Take the money, Maya, she whispered, her eyes burning with vicious triumph. It is more than you deserve. Do not try to fight us. You are completely out of your league. You might have a fancy television show, but Connor owns the people who own your network. Take the check and keep your mouth shut, just like a good girl. The silence in my office was thick and suffocating. Connor kept his hand flat on the heavy legal document, his fingers drumming a slow, arrogant rhythm against the blue binding. The $500,000 check sat right beside it, an obscene amount of money meant to function as a muzzle. I looked from the check to Connor and then finally to my twin sister. Mia was standing a few feet away, observing the scene with a look of profound satisfaction. She was draped in wealth, wearing a pristine white tailored suit that likely cost more than my first car. Diamonds glittered at her earlobes and at her throat, catching the ambient light of the studio and throwing sharp little reflections across the walls. She looked like the perfect society wife, the flawless philanthropist, the golden child who had fulfilled every single one of our parents' lofty, hollow expectations. But beneath the designer makeup and the perfectly coiffed hair, her eyes betrayed her. They were cold, hard, and entirely devoid of the sisterly affection she had faked for the cameras just 24 hours prior. She took a slow, deliberate step closer to my desk, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. She tilted her head, adopting a look of mock pity that made my stomach turn. I actually feel sorry for you, Maya. She began, her voice dripping with condescension. I really do. I look at you sitting behind this glass desk, wearing your severe little outfits, trying so desperately to look intimidating. You want the world to think you are this fearless, independent woman who conquered the media industry. But I know the truth. I know exactly who you are. I did not speak. I simply kept my hands folded in my lap, leaning back in my chair, allowing her to dig herself deeper into her own delusion. My silence seemed to embolden her. She took another step forward, placing her hands flat on the edge of my desk, leaning into my personal space. The overpowering scent of her expensive floral perfume washed over me, heavy and cloying. "You are exactly the same desperate, angry little girl who got dragged out of our foyer by the state," Maya whispered, her tone turning vicious. "You have spent your entire life trying to prove you are worthy of the Washington name. You built this whole ridiculous television career just to force us to look at you. You orchestrated this entire fake reunion yesterday, throwing money at our father just to get our attention. And now you are trying to extort my husband because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me." She let out a sharp, breathless laugh, shaking her head as if my very existence was a tragic joke. "You want to know what is truly pathetic?" she continued, her eyes locking onto mine with burning intensity. "I run the Sterling Hope Foundation. We help underprivileged, discarded children every single day, children exactly like you were. I know what desperation looks like. I see it in their faces, and I see it in your eyes right now. You are not a crusader for justice, Maya. You are just broke. You are needy, clinging to this television show, hoping you can shake down my family for a payday before your ratings tank." She leaned even closer until her face was inches from mine. A cruel, triumphant smile stretched across her perfect lips. She leaned down and whispered the words she knew would hit the hardest. The exact words our mother had used on that rainy afternoon 19 years ago. "Mom was right about you that day. She is the difficult one. Her sister has a future." The words hung in the air between us. "She is the difficult one. Her sister has a future." Maya watched my face, eagerly waiting for the explosion. She was waiting for me to scream, to cry, to throw my coffee mug against the wall. She wanted me to lose control. She wanted to prove to Connor that I was the unstable, violent liability they had always claimed I was. She wanted the satisfaction of breaking me. I felt my heart rate slow down. The anger that had been simmering in my chest instantly cooled into something sharp and absolute. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked right through her, maintaining a level of absolute stoicism that caused her victorious smile to falter slightly. Connor stepped in, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He cleared his throat loudly, eager to reassert his authority over the room. He tapped his signet ring against the desk, drawing my attention back to the legal document and the check. "My wife is right," Connor said, his voice carrying the deep, resonant timbre of a man who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed instantly. "You are out of your depth here, Maya. You are playing a dangerous game with people who own the board. The Sterling family does not tolerate public embarrassment. We do not allow disgruntled, estranged relatives to drag our name through the mud on cable television." He leaned his weight onto his hands, looming over my desk, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "I have a team of corporate lawyers on retainer who could tie you up in litigation for the next decade." Connor threatened, his eyes narrowing. "I could make one phone call to the executive board of this network, and your investigative show would be canceled before lunch. I could have you blacklisted from every major media outlet in the country. You would never work in journalism again. You would lose this office, your apartment, and your entire reputation." He tapped the check with his index finger. "Or you can be smart," he offered, his tone softening into a manipulative corporate purr. "You can sign this non-disclosure agreement right now. You take the $500,000. You pay off whatever massive debts you are hiding. You secure your financial future. In exchange, you give me your absolute legally binding silence. You do not ask Marcus about his failing business on your live broadcast. You do not ask Mia about her foundation. You do not mention the Sterling family. You stick to a pre-approved, sanitized script about a happy, miraculous family reunion." Connor stood up straight, adjusting his suit jacket, supremely confident that he had just delivered a masterful checkmate. "Sign the paper, Maya. Take the money and keep your mouth shut. It is the best deal you will ever get in your life." Maya crossed her arms, standing shoulder to shoulder with her powerful husband. She looked down at me with absolute contempt. "Take the money, Maya," she echoed. "Know your place." I looked at the $500,000 check. It was an astonishing amount of money. It was enough to buy a house in cash. It was enough to secure a comfortable life, To them, it was pocket change. To them, it was simply the cost of doing business, the price of sweeping an inconvenience under the rug. They genuinely believed that every single person on Earth had a price tag, and they were entirely convinced they had just met mine. I reached out and placed my hand over the check. Maya let out a soft, mocking sigh of relief. Connor smirked, a look of profound arrogance settling over his features. They had won. The difficult sister had been bought and paid for. I slowly pulled the check toward me, sliding it across the smooth glass surface of my desk. I picked it up, examining the intricate watermark and the bold, authorized signature of Connor Sterling. Then, without a word, I opened my top desk drawer. I reached inside and pulled out my favorite pen, a heavy silver Mont Blanc. I uncapped the pen. The metallic click echoed sharply in the quiet room. I pulled the thick legal document toward me. I flipped past the pages of dense, suffocating legalese. I flipped past the clauses detailing the severe financial penalties for defamation. I flipped past the paragraphs prohibiting me from making any negative statements regarding the character, business practices, or personal lives of the Washington and Sterling families. I went straight to the final page. I pressed the nib of my pen to the signature line. I did not hesitate. I did not read the terms. I signed my name in a bold, flowing script, Maya Washington. The scratching sound of the pen on the paper seemed impossibly loud. When I finished, I capped the pen and set it down. I picked up the contract, squared the edges neatly, and slid the entire packet back across the desk toward Connor. Connor stared at the signed document, clearly taken aback by how easily I had surrendered. He had come prepared for a fight, for a negotiation, for a screaming match. My absolute compliance had completely derailed his momentum. He looked at the signature, then looked up at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. I looked directly at Mia, my expression completely blank. "You have my absolute word," I said, my voice projecting clear and strong across the room. "I will not say a single negative thing about the Washington family on my broadcast this Friday. I will not utter a single bad word about you, Mia. I will not insult Marcus or Patricia. I will not make any defamatory claims against the Sterling family. I will be the absolute picture of journalistic integrity and sisterly grace. You have purchased my complete compliance." Connor let out a short, triumphant breath. He snatched the contract off the desk, rolling it tightly in his grip. The confusion vanished instantly, replaced by his usual overbearing arrogance. He had thrown money at a problem, and the problem had vanished. That was the only reality he understood. Smart girl. Connor said, a patronizing smile spreading across his face. He tapped the rolled-up contract against his palm. "I will have my legal team send over the pre-approved talking points by tomorrow morning. Stick to the script, Maya. Do not try to improvise." Maya stepped forward, her chest puffed out with victory. She looked at me as if I were a stain on her perfect white shoes. "I knew you would take the money." Maya sneered, her voice dripping with disgust. "You always were weak. Enjoy the payout. Try not to spend it all in one place." She turned on her heel, her hair whipping over her shoulder. Connor placed a protective hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the door. They walked out of my office together, their heads held high, radiating absolute superiority. They were smiling, sharing a private joke about the pathetic, desperate sister they had just successfully bribed into silence. They walked out the double doors completely confident that their wealth had shielded them from any possible consequence. They believed that money had solved everything. They believed the contract locked me in a cage. As the door swung shut, sealing me alone in my office, I looked down at the $500,000 check still resting on my desk. I picked it up, holding it between my fingers. A cold, genuine smile slowly spread across my face. I had promised not to say a single bad word about them on television, and I intended to keep that promise to the letter. Because I did not need to say a single word. I had a guest star coming to the broadcast who was not bound by any non-disclosure agreement. I had a guest who had not signed away her right to speak. Connor Sterling had just spent $500,000 to lock my lips, completely unaware that he had left the front door wide open for Sarah Jenkins to walk through. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, plunging my office back into a state of pristine, insulated quiet. The faint, suffocating scent of Mia's expensive floral perfume lingered in the air, a temporary ghost of her staggering arrogance. I looked down at the $500,000 check sitting on my desk, resting perfectly parallel to the signed non-disclosure agreement, $500,000. To Connor Sterling, it was an eraser. It was a petty cash transaction meant to wipe away a decades-old stain on his wife-perfect lineage. I reached out and picked up the check. The thick, high-quality paper felt heavy between my fingers. I folded it neatly and slid it into my breast pocket, right next to the appearance contract Marcus and Patricia had eagerly signed the day prior. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, breaking the mask of stoicism I had maintained for the last 20 minutes. It was not a smile of joy. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a predator watching its prey willingly walk into a cage and lock the door from the inside. I reached across my desk and pressed the silver button on my main intercom console. The low electronic buzz was instantly answered by my lead studio assistant, David. "Yes, Maya," David voice crackled through the speaker, crisp, alert, and ready for direction. "David, I need you to initiate a full top-to-bottom diagnostic on the main stage projector system," I instructed, keeping my tone strictly professional but laced with an undeniable current of anticipation. "I want the resolution tested, the playback software updated, and the remote triggers verified. It has to be flawless. Furthermore, I need a complete sweep of the audio security protocols for Friday night broadcast." "Understood," David replied without hesitation. "I will get the tech team on it immediately. Are we expecting technical interference?" "No," I said smoothly, my eyes drifting to the empty chairs where Maya and Connor had just sat. "We are expecting a masterpiece. I want every microphone, every earpiece, and every soundboard channel subjected to an ironclad lockout. I want absolute control over who gets cut off, who gets amplified, and what goes out over the live feed. No one in the control room touches the master audio switch but me. Consider it locked down, Maya. Anything else?" "Yes. Ensure the isolated video feed in the green room is perfectly synced with the main stage monitors with zero latency. I want our special guest to hear and see every single word spoken on that stage before she walks out. The timing has to be absolute perfection." "Got it. We will run the simulations this afternoon." I released the intercom button and leaned back in my leather chair. I swiveled around to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sprawling Chicago skyline stood tall and unyielding against the bright morning sun, a chaotic landscape of glass and steel that I had fought tooth and nail to conquer. Connor Sterling and his army of highly paid corporate lawyers had drafted a flawless, watertight, non-disclosure agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal suppression designed to protect billionaires from the consequences of their own actions. It explicitly forbade Maya Washington from uttering a single derogatory, inflammatory, or controversial syllable about the Sterling or Washington empires. It bound me to absolute silence. It shackled my tongue with a $500,000 chain, demanding that I play the role of the grateful reunited sister. I let out a soft, echoing laugh that filled the empty corners of my office. They were so blinded by their own power, so accustomed to throwing money at their problems and watching them disappear, that they had missed the most glaring, fatal loophole in their own ironclad contract. The agreement bound me. It commanded my silence. It dictated my script. I was legally prohibited from exposing Marcus' fraudulent business practices, Patricia terrifying maternal cruelty, or Maya fake philanthropic facade. If I spoke the truth, Connor would bury me in litigation and strip away everything I had built. But the contract said absolutely nothing about my guests. It did not place a gag order on anyone else who happened to walk onto my stage. It completely failed to prohibit a third party from taking a live microphone standing in front of 30 million viewers and tearing their carefully constructed world to shreds. Connor had paid $500,000 to lock my lips, completely unaware that his money had absolutely no jurisdiction over the woman sitting in a hotel room exactly 3 blocks away, waiting for her cue. They genuinely believed they had bought a sanitized, heartwarming family reunion. They thought they were walking into a controlled environment where they held all the strings, where their wealth acted as an impenetrable shield. They had no idea they were walking into a live broadcasted ambush. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the large whiteboard spanning the far wall of my office. It was covered in the detailed blocking and camera assignments for Friday night. I picked up a red marker and began tracing the lines of sight. Camera 1 would be locked on Maya. I wanted a tight, unblinking close-up of her face when the perfectly crafted image of the Sterling Hope Foundation was violently dismantled. I wanted the viewers at home to see the exact moment the smug superiority drained from her eyes. Camera 2 would hold on Marcus and Patricia. I needed a wide shot to capture their synchronized panic when they realized the prodigal daughter reunion was a trap designed to expose 19 years of child abandonment and financial deceit. Camera 3 was reserved for Connor, the untouchable heir, the man who threw checks at women to make them obedient. I wanted to broadcast his absolute loss of control in real time. Maya had called me desperate. She had called me weak. She had looked at me with the exact same disdain our mother had shown a 9-year-old girl standing in a sterile foster care waiting room, clutching a plastic bag of belongings. They had thrown me away like garbage to protect their image, to protect me a future, to ensure that nothing tarnished the pristine, wealthy Washington name. They had labeled me the difficult one because I refused to be a quiet accessory to their vanity. Now they were trying to buy my silence to protect the Sterling name. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and discarded people. They thought wealth insulated them from truth. They thought they could rewrite history as long as they had enough capital to fund the revision. I capped the red marker with a sharp snap. I did not need to speak a single bad word about my family. I was going to keep my promise. I was going to be the consummate, unbiased host. I was going to smile, ask gentle questions, and let them spin their web of lies on live television. I would give them enough rope to hang themselves a dozen times over. And then I was going to let their own buried secrets do all the talking. I was going to hand the microphone to the one person who knew exactly how the Washington family operated when the cameras were off. The one person whose life they had casually destroyed long before they ever tried to silence me. The witness they thought they had buried years ago. Friday night was not going to be a reunion. It was going to be a reckoning. A perfectly orchestrated, legally compliant, meticulously televised execution. And the best part of it all was that Marcus Washington and Connor Sterling had paid for their own front row tickets. Friday evening arrived with the crackling electricity that only a live national broadcast can generate. The corridors of my network were a hive of controlled chaos. Camera operators shouted final audio checks, producers hurried past with clipboards pressed to their chests, and the low hum of the massive studio servers vibrated through the floorboards. It was my domain. Every single person in this building answered to me. Yet as I pushed open the heavy oak door to VIP Green Room A, exactly 60 minutes before we were scheduled to go live, the atmosphere instantly shifted from professional urgency to toxic familiarity. Patricia was already pacing the length of the plush white carpet, her heels dug into the expensive fabric with sharp, aggressive strikes. She had completely abandoned the frayed emerald suit from our first meeting. Tonight she wore a heavily structured navy blue gown that screamed grieving but dignified matriarch. Marcus sat rigidly on a velvet sofa in the corner, clutching a glass of scotch, sweating profusely despite the aggressive air conditioning. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, Patricia stopped pacing. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was feeling before the biggest broadcast of my career. Instead, her eyes raked over my body, dissecting my appearance with the surgical precision of a woman who evaluated human worth entirely by aesthetics. I was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored crimson power suit. It was bold, unapologetic, and designed to command the screen. "You absolutely cannot wear that," Patricia stated, her voice slicing through the quiet room. I paused, letting my hand drop from the doorknob. "I beg your pardon? It is too aggressive," Patricia continued, waving her manicured hand dismissively at my suit. "It makes you look hard. It makes you look like a corporate raider, not a long-lost daughter returning to the fold. The audience needs to feel sympathy for you, Maya. They need to see a girl who was lost in the dark and finally found her way home to the light." That red suit practically screams defiance. Before I could respond to the sheer audacity of her critique, Patricia marched over to a garment bag hanging on the back of the dressing screen. She unzipped it with a swift, dramatic motion and pulled out a dress on a velvet hanger. She held it up against her own body for me to inspect. It was a pale, washed-out pink dress with a high collar, long sleeves, and a demure pleated skirt. It was the kind of dress a repentant teenager would wear to a court hearing to beg a judge for leniency. It was a costume designed to project utter subjugation. "I had my personal shopper pick this up for you yesterday," Patricia said, smoothing the cheap fabric with her hand. "It softens your features. It makes you look vulnerable. You will put this on before you go to the makeup chair. I want them to use a very light foundation on you. No heavy eyeliner, no red lipstick. You need to look like you have been through an ordeal, but you are finally safe." I stared at the pale pink dress. The absolute delusion radiating from this woman was staggering. She was standing in a multi-million-dollar television studio that I owned, preparing to appear on a primetime special that I had created, and she was attempting to dress me like a porcelain doll in a pageant she was directing. "I think my wardrobe is perfectly suitable for my broadcast," Patricia, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. Patricia's jaw tightened. She tossed the pink dress onto a nearby armchair and marched back toward me. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out 3 sheets of paper stapled together. The pages were covered in dense highlighted text. "Your wardrobe is only half the problem," Patricia snapped, thrusting the papers toward my chest. "I read the promotional teaser your network released this afternoon. It was incredibly vague. It just mentioned a miraculous family reunion and a look into your past. That is not good enough. We need to control the exact narrative from the very first minute." I did not take the papers. I simply looked down at them, then back up at her perfectly powdered face. "And what exactly is your approved narrative?" Patricia let out an exasperated sigh, treating me exactly like the 9-year-old girl she had discarded. She began reading from her highlighted script, pacing the room again to emphasize her points. "When you do your opening monologue, you need to set the stage properly," she dictated, her voice adopting a sickeningly sweet, theatrical cadence. "You will look directly into the camera and admit that you were a difficult, impulsive child. You will say that you fell in with the wrong crowd and made the terrible, tragic decision to run away from a loving home." Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the velvet sofa, taking a large gulp of his scotch, but he did not dare interrupt his wife's performance. Then Patricia continued, pointing a sharp acrylic nail at me. "You will introduce us. You will tell the audience how your poor, devastated parents spent a fortune hiring private investigators to scour the country for you. You will describe how Marcus and I cried every single night, how we kept your bedroom exactly the way you left it, hoping and praying for your return." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The lies were so practiced, so deeply ingrained in her psyche, that she actually seemed to believe them. She wanted me to go on national television and publicly absolve her of the greatest sin a mother could commit. She wanted me to take the blame for my own abandonment. "And the climax of the interview," Patricia said, stopping directly in front of me, her eyes burning with a desperate need for control. "The climax will be your apology." "My apology," I repeated, my tone dropping several degrees. "Yes, your apology," Patricia insisted, stepping even closer. "You will look at Marcus and me and you will cry. Real tears, Maya. You need to show genuine remorse. You will apologize for the pain you caused this family. You will apologize for the 19 years of agony we endured because of your selfish, impulsive childhood mistake. And then I will reach across the couch, I will hold your hand, and I will tell you that all is forgiven. That family is forever." She smiled, a wide, triumphant expression that made my skin crawl. "It is television gold. The audience will be weeping, the sponsors will love it, and the Washington name will be completely untouchable." She shoved the stapled papers against my chest again. "Memorize these talking points. Do not deviate from the script. Connor made it very clear that your network is legally bound to keep this positive. He paid you a ridiculous amount of money to ensure you play along. So you are going to put on that pink dress, you're going to sit on that stage, and you are going to tell the world exactly how sorry you are for breaking your mother's heart." The silence in the green room was heavy and absolute. The faint hum of the studio servers outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Patricia's rapid, expectant breathing. She genuinely believed she had won. She believed that Connor money and her own sheer force of will had finally broken the difficult one. She was waiting for me to take the papers, to bow my head, to accept my role as the grateful, repentant supporting character in her grand tragedy. I looked at the stapled script pressing against my crimson lapel. I looked at the pale pink dress lying discarded on the armchair. Then I lifted my gaze and locked eyes with Patricia. I did not reach for the papers. I did not move toward the dress. I let a slow, icy smile touch the corners of my mouth. I watched the triumphant expectation in Patricia's eyes slowly morph into a flicker of deep, instinctual panic as she realized I was not breaking. I was not bending. "I am not changing my clothes, Patricia," I said, my voice echoing off the stark white walls. "And I am certainly not reading your script." Patricia's hand froze in midair. The stapled pages of her carefully fabricated script trembled slightly as the reality of my defiance set in. For a long, suffocating moment, the only sound in the VIP green room was the steady, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock counting down the minutes to our live broadcast. She stared at me, her perfectly manicured features twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "Are you out of your mind?" Patricia hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She took a step closer, her eyes flashing with the familiar, terrifying authority she had used to control every aspect of my childhood. "You signed an agreement with Connor. He paid you $500,000 this morning. You took his money, Maya. You belong to us now. You will wear the dress, you will read the lines, and you will play your part, or I swear to you Connor will destroy this network and everything you have ever built." Marcus slammed his empty Scotch glass down on the glass coffee table. The sharp clatter made Patricia flinch, but I did not break eye contact with her. Marcus stood up, his large frame casting a heavy shadow across the room. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at me. "Listen to your mother, Maya." Marcus growled, his face already flushing with indignation. "We are not playing games with you. We gave you the chance to be part of this family again. We gave you the opportunity to fix your mistakes. You took sterling money. You are contractually obligated to follow our lead. Do not push us." I let out a slow, quiet breath. I reached into the breast pocket of my crimson blazer and withdrew the crisp, leather-bound checkbook. I did not pull out Connor $500,000 hush money. I pulled out the check I had written them yesterday, the literal lifeline for their drowning real estate empire. $200,000 written in bold blue ink, signed with my name. I held the check loosely between my index and middle fingers, letting it catch the bright vanity lights of the dressing room. Patricia's eyes immediately snapped down to the piece of paper. The sheer naked greed that washed over her face was almost pathetic. Her absolute desperation to maintain her wealthy facade overrode every single maternal instinct she had ever pretended to possess. "You seem to be confused about the power dynamic in this room, Patricia," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I could smell the sharp metallic tang of fear cutting through her expensive perfume. "Connor bought my silence regarding your family. He bought a legal guarantee that I would not defame the Washington or Sterling names on my broadcast, and I am a woman of my word. I will not say a single derogatory thing about you tonight." I raised the check slightly, bringing it right to her eye level. "But this check," I continued, my gaze locking onto hers, "this check buys your absolute obedience, and you have not earned it yet." Patricia scoffed, though her voice shook. "We had an agreement, Maya. We are doing your little interview. Hand over the money. We need to clear those loans by Monday morning." I smiled, a cold, clinical expression that made the blood drain from her cheeks. I took one more step forward, leaning in so close that my lips were mere inches from her ear. I lowered my voice to a whisper that only she could hear, ensuring the microphone packs sitting on the vanity table could not pick up a single syllable. "I know about the underground casino in the West Loop." "Patricia," I whispered softly. I felt her entire body go rigid. She stopped breathing, It was as if I had driven a stake directly through her heart. She stood absolutely paralyzed, her eyes wide and terrified, staring blankly at my shoulder. I know about the high-stakes baccarat tables. I continued, my voice a relentless rhythmic murmur in her ear. I know about the private rooms you visit every Tuesday and Thursday night while Marcus is allegedly entertaining clients. I am an investigative journalist, Mother. I follow the money. I followed the trail of offshore accounts, the dummy corporations, and the desperate late-night wire transfers. I pulled back just enough to see her face. She looked like a ghost. Her jaw hung slightly open, her perfectly painted lips trembling as she tried to form words that refused to come. But that is not even the best part, I said, leaning back in. The best part is the origin of those funds, $2.5 million. That is the exact amount Connor Sterling wired to your personal accounts last month, isn't it? An investment, he called it. A generous injection of capital from a loving son-in-law to help Marcus secure that commercial development down by the river. That is what Connor thinks anyway. He thinks he bought a prime piece of Chicago real estate. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the absolute terror wrap its icy fingers around her throat. He has no idea that you gambled every single cent of his investment away in less than 3 weeks. I whispered the final nail in the coffin. He has no idea that the money he gave you completely evaporated into the pockets of loan sharks and underground pit bosses. Connor Sterling is a man who destroys people for spilling coffee on his shoes. What do you think he will do to his beloved mother-in-law when he finds out she stole $2.5 million from him to feed a secret gambling addiction? Patricia let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself gripping the edge of the vanity table to stay upright. The stapled script she had tried to force upon me slipped from her trembling fingers and fluttered to the floor, completely forgotten. I stepped back, smoothing the lapels of my crimson suit. I held the $200,000 check up again. I have the bank statements, Patricia. I have the wire transfer receipts. I have time-stamped photographs of you entering the West Loop basement. It is all neatly compiled in a secure PDF file on my phone. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, bringing up Connor Sterling contact information. My thumb hovered over the send button. If you try to hand me that script again, I press send, I stated clearly, my voice ringing with absolute authority. If you step onto my stage tonight and try to play the victim, I press send. If you deviate from my questions by even one single syllable, if you try to shed a fake tear and blame me for running away, I press send. Connor will have the evidence before the broadcast even ends. He will divorce Maya, he will seize this house, and he will press criminal charges for fraud. You will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison, and Marcus will die penniless. Patricia was shaking violently now. Tears of genuine, unfiltered terror streamed down her cheeks, ruining her pristine makeup. She looked at the phone in my hand, then at the check, her entire world collapsing into a pile of ashes at her feet. Please, Maya, she choked out, her voice a broken, desperate rasp. Please, do not do this. I will do whatever you want. I will wear the dress. I will answer the questions. Just do not tell Connor. Please. You will wear the dress you arrived in, I commanded. And you will sit on that couch and you will answer my questions truthfully. You will let me control the narrative. You are no longer the director of this family, Patricia. You are my guest, and you will behave accordingly. Marcus had been standing by the sofa watching the exchange with mounting confusion. He had not heard the whispered details, but he saw the absolute devastation on his wife's face. He saw the way she crumbled before me, begging for mercy. The sight of his wife submitting to the daughter he had cast aside ignited a blind, patriarchal fury deep within him. He did not care about the context. He only cared that his authority was being challenged in his presence. What did you say to her? Marcus roared, his voice booming like thunder in the confined space. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. The facade of the wealthy, sophisticated businessman vanished, replaced by the violent, arrogant bully I remembered from my childhood. He raised his large, heavy hand, pulling it back to deliver a punishing slap across my face. He intended to strike me down, to physically force me back into the role of the subservient, frightened child he thought I still was. He wanted to teach the stubborn child a lesson. He swung his hand toward my face with all his strength. The heavy oak door of the VIP green room did not just open, it was thrown wide with a sudden commanding force that shattered the suffocating tension in the room. Before Marcus' heavy hand could find its target across my face, another hand shot forward. It was a swift, blinding blur of motion. A grip of absolute iron clamped down around Marcus' thick wrist, stopping his downward swing in midair. The sheer kinetic energy of his strike met a completely immovable object, sending a jarring shockwave up his arm that made him stumble backward. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply watched the arrogant fury drain from Marcus' face, instantly replaced by shock and a sudden sharp spike of physical pain. He wrenched his arm away, cradling his wrist against his chest, ready to unleash a torrent of verbal abuse at whoever had dared to touch him. But the words died in his throat the moment he looked at the woman standing beside me. Sarah Jenkins stepped fully into the bright, unforgiving vanity lights of the dressing room. She was no longer the exhausted, overworked state social worker in the frayed, rain-soaked cardigan who had arrived at the Washington estate 19 years ago. Time and relentless ambition had forged her into something entirely different. Today, Sarah wore a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit that radiated unyielding authority. Her silver hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style, and her posture was as straight as a steel rod. But it was the heavy, gleaming gold badge pinned securely to her left lapel that immediately commanded the room. It was the official seal of the Illinois Attorney General Office. She was a senior investigator for the state, a woman who wielded the power to dismantle empires with a single subpoena. "I strongly advise you to keep your hands to yourself, Mr. Washington," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the lethal, freezing edge of a drawn blade. "Because if you ever attempt to strike this woman again, I will personally ensure your next televised appearance is a highly publicized perp walk out of your corporate headquarters." Marcus took another step back, his blustering bravado instantly evaporating. He looked from the gold badge on her lapel to the absolute zero expression in her eyes, realizing entirely too late that he had just attempted to assault a prominent media figure in front of a high-ranking state official. He swallowed hard, his face losing its crimson flush and turning a sickly pallid gray. Patricia had been leaning against the dressing table, still paralyzed by my threat regarding her underground gambling debts. At the sound of the new voice, her head snapped up. She stared at Sarah. For a few seconds, there was only utter confusion. Then the realization began to creep over her features, a slow, agonizing dawn of recognition that stripped away every remaining ounce of her high society poise. Patricia's eyes widened to the point of tearing. Her perfectly manicured hands began to shake violently. She remembered. She remembered the severe, judging eyes of the woman who had stood in her grand marble foyer 19 years ago. She remembered the woman who had handed her a clipboard and a pen, the woman who had watched her casually sign away her 9-year-old daughter parental rights just to protect the Washington family brand. "You," Patricia whispered, her voice barely a breath of air. The word carried the absolute weight of a ghost stepping out of the shadows. "It is you. It has been a very long time, Patricia Sarah," said her tone utterly devoid of warmth. 19 years to be exact. I see you have upgraded your wardrobe, but your parenting style remains exactly as violent and transactional as I remember. Patricia opened her mouth, trying to formulate a defense, trying to summon the arrogant, untouchable matriarch persona she had worn just 10 minutes prior. But the words refused to come. She was trapped in a room with the daughter she had abandoned and the woman who had taken her away. The two living, breathing testaments to her greatest sin were standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking her only exit. "I have seen thousands of broken homes in my career," Sarah continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Patricia. "I have seen addiction, poverty, and desperation, but I have never forgotten that rainy afternoon in your foyer. I have never forgotten the sheer, chilling lack of emotion on your face when you handed over your own flesh and blood to the state system. You did not shed a single tear. You did not ask where she would sleep that night. You just wanted her out of your sight, so you could focus on your golden child. Marcus looked between his wife and the state investigator, his mind desperately trying to catch up to the rapidly escalating disaster. He had spent his entire life bullying his way out of consequences, but he was completely unarmed against the sheer moral and legal authority radiating from Sarah Jenkins. And I certainly never forgot your exact words when you handed back the custody relinquishment forms, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving register. She looked directly into Patricia's terrified eyes. She is the difficult one. Her sister has a future. The quote hung in the stagnant air of the green room. It was the exact phrase Patricia had used. It was the exact phrase Maya had weaponized against me just an hour ago in my office. It was the toxic mantra of the Washington family, the foundational lie they had told themselves for 2 decades to justify their cruelty. Sarah let a sharp, humorless smile touch her lips. I came here tonight for a very specific reason, Sarah said, gesturing toward me. I came here to see exactly how the people who threw away a 9-year-old girl plan to face the future of the discarded child. Because the difficult one did not just survive the system you threw her into. She conquered it. She built an empire. And now she holds your entire public existence in the palm of her hand. I stepped forward, aligning myself perfectly with Sarah. I looked at the 2 terrified people cowering by the sofa. They were stripped of their wealth, their arrogance, and their false narratives. They were finally completely exposed. You wanted a family reunion, I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear. You wanted to sit on my stage, shed fake tears, and force me to read a sanitized script. You wanted to lie to 30 million viewers to protect your precious reputation. But the rules of engagement have changed. You are not going to read your script. You are not going to mention my childhood. You are going to walk out there, sit on those chairs, and you are going to answer every single question I ask you with absolute honesty. I reached into my pocket and touched the edge of the $200,000 check. Because if you lie, I continued, my gaze locking onto Patricia, I will expose the casino debts. And if you attempt to play the victim, Sarah will step onto that stage and tell the world exactly how you abandoned your child. You will be ruined financially by your son-in-law, and you will be ruined socially by the truth. You have no leverage. You have no escape. You belong to me for the next 60 minutes. Marcus opened his mouth, a desperate final attempt to assert dominance, but a sharp, frantic knocking on the green room door cut him off instantly. The door swung open, and David, my lead studio director, stuck his head inside. He was wearing his heavy communications headset, his eyes wide with adrenaline and the frantic urgency of live television. Maya, we are at the 10-second mark, David announced rapidly, his voice completely oblivious to the psychological warfare that had just concluded in the room. The opening montage is rolling. The crowd is hyped. We need the Washingtons out on the main stage right now. They need to be in their seats before the countdown hits 0. I looked at David and gave him a sharp, confirming nod. Thank you, David. We are right behind you. David ducked back out into the chaotic hallway, leaving the door wide open. The roar of the live studio audience flooded into the green room, a massive, deafening wave of applause and anticipation. 30 million people were tuning in. The lights were burning. The cameras were rolling. I turned back to Marcus and Patricia. They looked absolutely nauseated. The color had completely vanished from their faces. Their breathing was shallow and rapid. They were staring out the open door toward the blazing lights of the main stage, as if it were a platform leading straight to a guillotine. They had no approved talking points. They had no idea what questions I was going to ask. They had no idea if Sarah Jenkins was going to follow them onto the stage. They were walking into a live, unedited, nationally televised broadcast, completely blind, surrounded by traps they could not see. I extended my hand toward the open door, offering a polite, chillingly professional smile. 30 million people are waiting to hear the truth about the Washington family, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the roar of the crowd. Do not keep them waiting, Mother. After you. Marcus lowered his hand, his chest heaving with impotent rage, but he had no choice. He and Patricia walked through the doorway, moving like prisoners marching toward the gallows. The deafening roar of the studio audience hit us like a physical wall as we emerged from the backstage shadows into the blinding glare of the main stage. The set was designed to feel intimate yet monumental. Sleek leather armchairs were arranged in a semicircle around a low glass table, all bathed in the warm, flattering glow of multi-million-dollar studio lighting. 30 million viewers were tuning in across the country, anticipating a heartwarming tale of family reconciliation. I took my seat in the host chair, crossing my legs and resting my customized tablet on my lap. Patricia and Marcus sank into the plush sofa opposite me. My twin sister Mia was already seated in the adjacent armchair, wearing her pristine white suit looking like a beacon of absolute purity. As the red tally light illuminated on the center camera, signaling we were broadcasting live to the nation, a terrifyingly flawless transformation overtook my family. The sheer terror I had witnessed in the green room vanished without a trace. Patricia straightened her spine, relaxed her shoulders, and instantly adopted the radiant, sorrowful expression of a mother who had endured a lifetime of hardship. Marcus placed a comforting, protective hand over hers, playing the role of the steadfast patriarch to absolute perfection. Maya did not miss a single beat. Before I could even issue my formal welcome to the audience, she leaned forward, her eyes glistening with perfectly manufactured tears. "Oh, Maya!" Maya choked out, her voice trembling with a masterclass level of theatrical emotion. "You have no idea how long we have prayed for this exact moment. Looking at you sitting across from me, it feels like I am finally waking up from a 19-year nightmare. I spent every single night looking at your empty bed across our room, wondering if you were safe, wondering if you were cold. We left the porch light on for you every single night. We never stopped looking. We never stopped hoping you would just walk back through the front door." Patricia dabbed at the corner of her eye with a monogrammed handkerchief, exceptionally careful not to smudge the light foundation she had insisted upon. "It was an agony no mother should ever have to endure." Patricia added, her voice a breathy whisper that carried perfectly through her lavalier microphone. "When you ran away from us, you took a piece of our souls with you. We spent an absolute fortune hiring private investigators. We traveled across the country chasing down every single rumor, every single false sighting. It tore this family apart. But today is not about the pain of the past. Today is about forgiveness. Today is about putting our broken family back together. We just want to welcome our lost girl home." The studio audience let out a collective sympathetic sigh. A few people in the front row were actually wiping their eyes. It was a spectacular performance. The sheer audacity of their lies was breathtaking. They were weaponizing national television to cement their status as the ultimate victims. If I did not know the absolute rotting truth of their souls, I might have believed them myself. I let the silence stretch for 3 full beats, allowing their fabricated grief to completely saturate the airwaves. I gave the audience a moment to absorb the tragic narrative of the runaway child and the heartbroken parents. Then I smiled. It was the warm, empathetic smile of a seasoned journalist, a look that millions of viewers trusted implicitly. "That is a truly beautiful sentiment, Mother," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the studio monitors. "And Mia, your dedication to my memory is nothing short of inspiring. It is a deeply compelling narrative. A rebellious, difficult 9-year-old girl overwhelmed by her own impulses simply packs a bag and vanishes into the dark night. She leaves behind a devastated, loving family who spares absolutely no expense to find her. That is the story you have told your friends, your powerful business partners, and the press for 2 decades." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The massive digital monitor behind us, which usually displayed our show logo in bright, welcoming colors, instantly switched feeds. It projected a high-resolution scan of a stark, heavily redacted legal document. The sudden shift in visuals caused a visible ripple of confusion through the studio audience. I looked directly into camera 1, ensuring the viewers at home were tracking my every word, then shifted my gaze to Patricia. "I have spent my entire career uncovering the truth." I continued, my tone shifting from conversational warmth to surgical precision. "And as an investigative journalist, there has always been one specific detail about your tragic story that completely defies logic. If I was a runaway, an impulsive child who simply fled into the dark, as you just claimed, how exactly did I manage to navigate the complex bureaucracy of the Illinois state foster care system entirely on my own? More importantly, how did a 9-year-old girl manage to forge 2 adult signatures on a government-issued custody relinquishment form? The air in the studio grew instantly thin. The comfortable, sympathetic atmosphere evaporated. Marcus' hand tightened around Patricia's fingers so hard his knuckles turned stark white. I pressed another button on my tablet, zooming in on the bottom section of the document displayed on the massive screen behind us. 2 signatures were magnified for 30 million people to examine. Harold Marcus Washington and Patricia Sterling Washington, both signed in bold, unmistakable black ink, dated precisely 19 years ago. "These are not missing person reports," I stated, my voice echoing clearly over the sudden dead silence of the audience. "They are not private investigator invoices or desperate flyers hung on telephone poles. These are official Department of Child and Family Services surrender documents. They are legally binding contracts permanently terminating your parental rights and transferring me into the custody of the state as a ward." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the glass table, closing the physical distance between us. "You did not leave a porch light on for me, Patricia," I said, striking the final blow with absolute clarity. "You drove me to a government building in downtown Chicago. You handed me over to a state social worker. You signed away your legal obligations with a stroke of a pen, and then you drove back to your affluent suburban mansion to focus entirely on raising the daughter you believed had a future." A low, shocked murmur began to ripple through the studio audience. It started in the back rows and swept forward like a tidal wave of disbelief. Whispers of absolute horror filled the gaps between my words. Maya faked tears instantly dried up her mouth, hanging open in a very uncharacteristic display of shock as she stared at the giant monitor. Patricia's posture completely collapsed. The dignified, sorrowful matriarch vanished entirely. Her jaw locked tightly, her eyes darted frantically around the studio, searching for an exit that did not exist. The thick layer of expensive television makeup could not hide the sickly, terrified pallor spreading across her face. The flawless, untouchable facade of the Washington family was cracking wide open on live television, and the entire world was watching it shatter. "Cut the feed." The voice tore through the stunned silence of the studio like a gunshot. It did not come from the control booth or the floor directors. It came from the center of the VIP seating section located just beyond the sweeping arc of the camera cranes. Connor Sterling surged to his feet. The billionaire heir, usually a portrait of calculated, icy composure, was completely unhinged. His expensive tailored suit jacket flared open as he stormed down the carpeted aisle, shoving past a bewildered production assistant who tried to block his path. His face was a mask of aristocratic fury. His jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered visibly beneath his skin. He had spent his entire life operating under the absolute certainty that his wealth could buy any outcome, silence any critic, and bury any inconvenience. Watching his carefully managed public image implode in real time was a reality his mind simply refused to accept. "Maya, get out of that chair!" Connor roared, pointing a commanding finger at his wife. "We are leaving. Right now. Do not say another word to her." Maya jerked in her seat as if she had been physically struck. She looked frantically from the giant digital monitor displaying her parents' signature on the state custody forms to her terrified mother and finally to her enraged husband. She was trapped. The golden child who had spent decades benefiting from the destruction of my childhood was suddenly caught in the crossfire of a war she could not manipulate. She gripped the armrests of her plush chair, her knuckles turning white, completely paralyzed by the conflicting demands of her collapsing world. Connor reached the edge of the elevated stage. 2 large security guards moved to intercept him, their hands raised in a calming gesture, but Connor shoved them aside with the arrogant force of a man who believed the law did not apply to him. He glared up at me, his eyes burning with a venomous, unmistakable threat. "Are you deaf?" Connor shouted, his voice echoing through the studio microphones and broadcasting straight into 30 million homes. "Shut these cameras off immediately. You signed a binding non-disclosure agreement this morning, Maya. You took $500,000 of my money to keep your mouth shut. You are in direct violation of a federal contract. I will sue this network into bankruptcy. I will personally see to it that you never work in broadcast journalism again. I will destroy your life." The studio audience gasped collectively. The revelation of a $500,000 bribe injected an entirely new level of scandal into the broadcast. The hushed whispers escalated into a chaotic, buzzing roar of outrage and fascination. In my earpiece, the frantic voice of David, my director, crackled with panic. "Maya, the legal department is flooding my board. They are screaming at us to cut to commercial. Sterling is threatening a massive lawsuit. Do we pull the plug? Give me the word." I reached up and pressed my index finger against my earpiece. "Do not even think about touching that feed, David." I commanded, my voice, an icy, unwavering whisper that cut straight through the chaos in the control room. "Keep every single camera rolling. Camera 3, give me a tight, isolated close-up of the man screaming at the edge of my stage. I want every viewer in the country to see exactly how Connor Sterling handles the truth." A red tally light blinked on the large pedestal camera to my right. The lens swiveled smoothly, locking directly onto Connor, flushed, furious face. He was suddenly magnified on the secondary monitors scattered around the studio, looking less like a sophisticated titan of industry and more like a desperate cornered bully. I smoothed the lapels of my suit and leaned forward, resting my forearms on the glass table. I looked down at Connor, holding his enraged stare with absolute unblinking calm. "You seem to be confused about the nature of live journalism, Connor," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the murmuring crowd, bringing an instant hush to the room. "This is not a private boardroom where you can simply throw a tantrum and dictate reality. You are standing on my stage. You are broadcasting on my network, and you do not get to issue orders here." Connor slammed his hand against the edge of the stage. "You are breaching the contract. You took the money. You promised you would not defame this family." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the precise surgical smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel trap. "I promised I would not defame you." I agreed, my tone entirely agreeable. I tapped the screen of my customized tablet. The massive digital monitor behind me, which had been displaying the damning custody relinquishment forms, instantly switched feeds. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Displayed in massive high-definition text was the exact non-disclosure agreement Connor had forced me to sign just hours ago. The heavily redacted document highlighted the specific restrictive clauses his corporate lawyers had drafted. The camera zoomed in, dynamically magnifying the bold black signatures at the bottom of the page, my signature, and Connor Sterling's signature. "You bought a very specific guarantee this morning, Connor," I said, reading the text aloud for the 30 million viewers hanging on my every word. "You paid $500,000 to ensure that I, Maya Washington, would not utter a single defamatory statement, spread malicious rumors, or offer disparaging personal opinions regarding the Sterling or Washington families. You drafted a contract to gag my personal voice." I stood up from my chair. I walked slowly around the glass table, moving toward the edge of the stage until I was looking directly down at him. "But here is the beautiful thing about the law, Connor." I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "It requires precise interpretation. I am not offering a personal opinion tonight. I am not spreading malicious rumors. I have not said a single defamatory word about your wife or her parents. Defamation requires a lie, and I am dealing strictly in verifiable facts." Connor's jaw worked furiously. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen behind me, which had reverted back to the state custody forms bearing Patricia and Marcus' signatures. "You are displaying private family documents to humiliate us. That is a breach of the agreement." I shook my head slowly, letting a sharp clinical edge enter my voice. "No, Connor. That is where your highly paid legal team made a fatal miscalculation. The contract forbids me from making claims. But it does not forbid me from acting in my capacity as a journalist. It does not forbid me from asking questions. And it absolutely does not forbid me from providing a platform for a credentialed state-appointed official to present undeniable government-verified legal documents. Connor froze. The aggressive forward momentum of his body completely halted. The arrogant certainty in his eyes shattered, replaced by a sudden chilling realization. He looked at the contract on the monitor, his mind racing through the legal jargon, frantically searching for the loophole he had missed. He realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that he had focused entirely on silencing me completely, failing to anticipate that I might simply hand the microphone to someone else. I stepped back, turning my attention away from the defeated billionaire and addressing the camera directly. As I mentioned earlier, I am not the one making these claims tonight. I announced, my voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. I am simply the host. The documents you are seeing on the screen behind me are not rumors. They are not gossip. They are the official finalized records of the Illinois Department of Child and Family Services. They are matters of state record. I extended my hand toward the shadowed wings of the stage. And to explain exactly what these documents mean and to verify their absolute authenticity, I would like to welcome a very special guest to the program, I said. She is a woman who has dedicated her life to protecting the vulnerable. She is a senior investigator for the Illinois Attorney General Office, and she is the exact state official who stood in the Washington family foyer 19 years ago and processed my removal from their home. The studio audience erupted into a massive, deafening wave of applause. The sound was overwhelming, a thunderous roar of anticipation and righteous vindication. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the roaring crowd, "please welcome Senior Investigator Sarah Jenkins." The stage doors parted. Sarah Jenkins walked out into the blinding studio lights. She moved with a slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm authority. Her tailored charcoal suit commanded absolute respect, and the heavy gold badge pinned to her lapel caught the studio lights gleaming like a beacon of inescapable truth. She held a thick manila folder in her right hand. Connor Sterling stood at the edge of the stage, utterly powerless. He could not yell at a state investigator. He could not threaten to sue the Attorney General office for presenting factual legal documents. His $500,000 bribe was entirely useless. He was completely legally checkmated on live national television. He watched in helpless, silent agony as Sarah Jenkins bypassed him entirely, walking up the short steps and taking her place on the main stage, ready to dismantle the Washington family empire piece by piece. Sarah Jenkins settled into the leather armchair to my right with the absolute poise of a woman who held the executioner's switch. She placed the thick, weathered manila folder onto the glass table between us. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the glass echoed sharply through the studio microphones. 30 million people collectively held their breath. The silence in the massive room was absolute, heavy, and charged with electric anticipation. "Investigator Jenkins," I began, my voice steady and completely devoid of the familial warmth I had faked just moments ago. "Thank you for joining us. For the sake of the viewers at home and the audience sitting before us, could you please clarify the exact nature of the documents currently displayed on our monitors?" Sarah did not look at the monitors. She did not look at the audience. She locked her steely gaze directly onto Patricia and Marcus Washington. "These are voluntary surrender and termination of parental rights affidavits," Sarah stated, her voice ringing with clear clinical authority. "They are not missing child reports. They are not kidnapping investigations. 19 years ago on a Tuesday morning, Marcus and Patricia Washington contacted the Illinois Department of Child and Family Services. They requested the immediate removal of their 9-year-old daughter from their custody. They stated she was incorrigible, a threat to their household harmony, and a financial burden they were no longer willing to bear." "Lies!" Marcus roared suddenly, finding his voice. He lunged halfway out of his seat, his face twisting into a mask of desperate fury. "You are lying. She was a deeply troubled child. She ran away. We spent millions looking for her. You are a disgruntled state employee trying to extort my family." Sarah did not flinch. She simply reached down, opened the manila folder, and withdrew a single yellowed sheet of paper covered in faded type. "I conducted the intake interview myself, Mr. Washington. Sarah said, her tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I sat in your grand foyer. I looked at the packed suitcase sitting by the front door. And I spoke to the 9-year-old girl you were throwing away. She was not troubled. She was not violent. She was simply incredibly observant. Patricia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically toward the stage exits. She knew exactly what was contained in that yellowed report. "Would you like to tell them what I saw, Mother?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "Or shall we let Investigator Jenkins read it directly from the state archives?" Patricia violently shook her head, tears ruining her pristine makeup, but she remained completely mute. Sarah adjusted her glasses and looked down at the paper. According to my official evaluation filed on the exact day of the surrender, the child disclosed that she had walked into her father's home office the previous evening. She witnessed her father, Marcus Washington, engaging in a highly inappropriate physical relationship with a female employee. The child threatened to tell her mother. A collective horrified gasp ripped through the studio audience. The sound was a physical wave of revulsion. Marcus collapsed back into his sofa, his jaw dropping open, the blustering billionaire patriarch instantly reduced to a cornered, exposed fraud. But here is the truly fascinating part of the psychological profile. Sarah continued, relentlessly pressing the advantage. Patricia Washington was immediately informed of this infidelity. But instead of addressing her husband's betrayal, she chose to protect her lifestyle. The parents made a calculated, unified decision to eliminate the witness. They needed the scandal buried permanently to protect their corporate image. Sarah turned the page in her file, her eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. Furthermore, the parents cited significant financial restructuring as a primary cause for the surrender, Sarah read aloud. They explicitly stated they needed to consolidate their household resources. I turned my head slowly, locking my gaze onto my twin sister. Maya was trembling, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, her perfect white suit suddenly looking like a glaring beacon of guilt. "Resources for what, Investigator Jenkins?" I asked quietly. Sarah looked directly at Maya. "For pageant entry fees, specialized vocal coaching, travel expenses, and custom wardrobes for their remaining daughter, Maya." The parents determined that funding 2 children was a strain on their liquid assets, and they chose to funnel every available dollar into the child they deemed more profitable. Maya's face turned a sickening shade of gray. She looked at her parents, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The narrative she had believed her entire life, the tragic story of the lost twin sister she had mourned on countless talk shows, was a complete fabrication designed to fund her beauty queen ambitions. When I asked Mrs. Washington if she was absolutely certain she wanted to make her daughter a ward of the state, Sarah said, her voice echoing into the silent studio. Her answer was recorded verbatim. She pointed directly at Maya, who was standing quietly by the door with a single trash bag of belongings. Sarah paused, letting the silence stretch to the absolute breaking point. "She pointed at her daughter," Sarah repeated, "and she said she is the difficult one. Her sister has a future." I let out a slow, steady breath. The words still carried a phantom sting, a ghost of the pain that had defined my childhood. But tonight they were my absolute weapon. "She is the difficult one." I echoed, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying resonance. "Her sister has a future." It is a haunting repetition. It is the toxic mantra of this family. You repeated it to yourself so often you actually began to believe your own lies. You convinced the world that you were grieving parents. You convinced yourselves that throwing away a child was a necessary business transaction. The studio audience exploded. It was not a murmur. It was a roar of genuine, unfiltered outrage. People were standing up in their seats, shouting in disgust. The carefully constructed, wholesome image of the Washington family was disintegrating into dust before 30 million witnesses. The cameras zoomed in relentlessly, capturing every bead of sweat on Marcus' forehead, capturing the ruined mascara streaming down Patricia's face, capturing the absolute devastation of their empire. Maya suddenly snapped. The realization that her entire career, her marriage to Connor, and her public persona were built on a foundation of child abandonment and financial fraud broke something deep inside her mind. The golden child could not handle the blinding light of the truth. "Shut up!" Maya shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat like a siren. She bolted out of her armchair, her pristine image shattering into 1,000 pieces of frantic, unhinged fury. She did not turn her anger toward her parents. She turned it toward the cameras. "Turn them off!" Mia screamed, waving her arms wildly at the camera operators. "Turn the feeds off right now! You are ruining my life! You are ruining my brand! Make her stop talking!" She spun around, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at Patricia and Marcus, her face twisted with a selfish, narcissistic rage that mirrored her parents perfectly. "How could you let her do this to me?" Maya wailed, her voice echoing with pure, unfiltered entitlement over the shouting crowd. "Connor is going to leave me. The sponsors are going to drop me. You were supposed to handle her. You promised me you had leverage over her. You stupid, useless old fools. You ruined my moment." The cameras captured it all. The golden child completely unraveling, showing the entire country that she cared absolutely nothing about the sister she had spent a decade pretending to mourn. She only cared about her brand. She only cared about the spotlight. The Washington family was tearing itself apart on live television, a spectacular self-inflicted implosion born of their own greed and lies. Maya's footsteps echoed like cracked whip strikes against the pristine glass floor of the stage. She did not care that 30 million people were watching. She did not care that the red tally lights of 5 different broadcast cameras were locked directly onto her face. The flawless, angelic facade she had cultivated for 2 decades was completely gone, replaced by a snarling, desperate ferocity. She crossed the short distance between our armchairs and loomed over me, thrusting a trembling, manicured finger mere inches from my nose. "You planned this from the very beginning," Maya hissed, her voice vibrating with a hysterical, venomous pitch that made the studio audio technicians scramble to adjust the sound levels. "You dragged us out here under the guise of a heartwarming reunion just to launch a premeditated, vindictive ambush. You are sick, Maya. You are completely delusional." I did not move a single muscle. I sat perfectly still in my host chair, my hands resting calmly on my lap, allowing the cameras to capture the stark, undeniable contrast between her unhinged lunacy and my absolute composure. "This has nothing to do with justice or truth," Maya screamed, her chest heaving as she spun around to face the studio audience, frantically trying to hijack the narrative. "Do not listen to a word she says. She is lying. She is manipulating state documents. She is doing all of this for one simple reason. She is overwhelmingly, pathologically jealous of me. She has always been jealous of me." A wave of uncomfortable, disgusted murmurs rippled through the live audience. People exchanged bewildered glances. The sheer blinding arrogance required to stand on national television moments after undeniable proof of her parents abandoning her twin sister was displayed and claimed to be the victim of jealousy was staggering. But Maya was entirely oblivious to the mood of the room. She was trapped in the echo chamber of her own lifelong privilege. "You look at me and you see everything. You could never be," Maya yelled, turning her blazing eyes back to me. She gestured wildly toward the VIP section where Connor Sterling was standing with his arms crossed, his face a mask of absolute furious humiliation. "Look at my husband. I am married to Connor Sterling. I married into a billionaire dynasty. I live in an estate you could not even afford to clean. I have social standing, power, and respect. I am a beloved public figure, and you are nothing but a bitter, second-rate tabloid journalist trying to tear down a woman who is infinitely superior to you." In my earpiece, my director David let out a low whistle. "Let her keep digging, Maya." David murmured, his voice tight with the adrenaline of producing the most explosive television broadcast of the decade. "The audience retention numbers are going through the roof. Do not interrupt her. Give her enough rope to hang herself." I did not need the instruction. I had no intention of stopping her. Maya was dismantling the Washington family brand faster and more thoroughly than I ever could have hoped. Patricia tried to intervene. She pushed herself up from the sofa, her face a pale, ruined mess of streaked makeup and terror. Maya, sweetheart, please. Patricia begged, her voice trembling. Sit down. You are making it worse. The cameras are rolling. Please just sit down. Do not tell me to sit down. Maya snapped, swatting her mother hand away with a vicious, dismissive gesture. I am not going to let this jealous failure ruin my brand. I have worked too hard to build my reputation. Maya smoothed the front of her expensive white suit, lifting her chin with a sickening display of moral superiority. She turned back to the primary camera, adopting a deeply condescending, sorrowful expression, instantly attempting to pivot from screaming banshee to misunderstood saint. Do you have any idea what I do with my life, Maya? She asked, her voice dripping with artificial empathy. Do you have any idea the amount of good I put into this world? I do not spend my days digging up dirt and ambushing people. I am the founder and acting president of the Sterling Hope Foundation for Vulnerable Youth. I run a massive global charitable organization. I raise millions of dollars every single year for orphans, for children who have been abandoned by the system, for kids who have absolutely nothing. The absolute profound hypocrisy of her statement hung in the studio air, so thick and toxic, it was almost suffocating. The audience went completely deathly silent. I build shelters? Maya declared, feeding off the silence, mistaking it for awe rather than revulsion. I fund educational grants. I travel to underprivileged neighborhoods, and I actually save children's lives. I am a savior to the abandoned. I do the holy, vital work of protecting the innocent. I am a good, noble person. And you have the absolute audacity to sit there and drag my name through the mud because you are angry about something that happened when we were children. I was 9 years old. I had nothing to do with it. But I took the opportunities I was given, and I made myself into a champion for the discarded. Maya paused, panting slightly, crossing her arms over her chest, as if she had just delivered an impenetrable, unassailable defense. She stared down at me, her eyes burning with a triumphant, arrogant fire. She genuinely believed her wealth and her highly publicized philanthropic hobbies completely shielded her from accountability. I let the silence stretch for 5 full seconds. I let the millions of viewers watching at home fully digest the image of a woman bragging about her charitable work for orphans while standing feet away from the twin sister her family had deliberately orphaned to fund her childhood beauty pageants. Then I smiled. It was a slow, genuinely amused smile that caused Maya's triumphant expression to falter. Are you quite finished? I asked quietly. I stood up from my chair. I did not rush. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored crimson suit, projecting absolute, unshakable calm. I walked around the glass table, ignoring Maya's pointing finger, and stood right in front of her. The Sterling Hope Foundation for Vulnerable Youth. I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear, devoid of any anger. A truly spectacular organization. You host million-dollar galas at luxury hotels. You wear custom designer gowns to fundraising dinners. You pose for the cover of high society magazines, holding the hands of impoverished children for exactly as long as the photographer needs to get the shot. It is a brilliant, highly effective tax shelter for your husband corporation, and it provides you with the perfect shield of moral superiority. Maya's jaw tightened. I help those children, she spat. You use those children as props, Maya. I corrected my tone, dropping to a freezing clinical register. You stand on the stage and boast about saving the abandoned, completely willfully ignoring the fact that your entire existence of luxury, your pageant titles, your private tutors, and your eventual marriage to a billionaire were all directly funded by the blood money of your own discarded twin sister. You sleep comfortably in your mansion, swathed in silk, knowing perfectly well that the very foundation of your life was built on my removal. You did not just survive my abandonment. You actively profited from it. That is a lie! Maya shrieked, taking a step back as the studio audience began to boo loudly. I earned everything I have. You are just a bitter dropout trying to steal my spotlight. I shook my head slowly, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow pity for the delusional woman standing before me. I'm not trying to steal anything from you, Mia, I said, my voice softening slightly, ensuring every word carried through the microphones. Because despite your billions, despite your foundation, and despite your powerful husband, you are entirely bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing of real value. I turned away from my sister, leaving her standing in the center of the stage, utterly deflated and exposed. I walked back toward the armchairs and stopped beside Sarah Jenkins. You boast about saving orphans, I continued addressing Mia, but looking at the cameras. You boast about providing love to the abandoned, but you have absolutely no idea what it actually means to save a child. You do not know the first thing about unconditional love, because you were raised by people who viewed love as a financial transaction. I rested my hand gently on the back of Sarah's leather chair. Sarah looked up at me, her severe professional expression softening into a look of profound, unwavering pride. The gold badge of the Illinois Attorney General office gleamed on her lapel, but it was the warmth in her eyes that anchored my soul. Investigator Jenkins has already explained her professional role in my removal from the Washington estate 19 years ago, I announced to the studio audience and the millions watching at home. She processed the paperwork. She finalized the severance of Patricia and Marcus Washington parental rights. She ensured I was safely removed from a highly toxic, abusive environment. I looked back at Patricia and Marcus, who were huddled together on the sofa watching their entire legacy burn to the ground. But what the Washington family does not know, I said, my voice ringing with absolute victorious clarity, is that Sarah Jenkins did not just drop me off at a group home and walk away. She did not process my file and move on to the next tragic case. She saw a terrified 9-year-old girl who had been thrown away like garbage, and she made a very different choice. She holds another, much more important title in my life. A title she earned not through blood, not through wealth, and certainly not through public relations galas, but through absolute, unyielding devotion. I stepped back, extending my hand toward the woman sitting beside me. I looked directly into the camera, delivering the final devastating blow to the Washington family facade. Sarah, I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion, would you mind introducing yourself to my biological family, using your second title? Sarah Jenkins turned her attention away from me and faced the center camera. She reached up to the lapel of her charcoal suit with slow, deliberate precision. Her fingers unclasped the older badge she had worn during her tenure with Child Protective Services. She placed it carefully onto the glass table. Then she reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a much larger, heavier platinum shield. She pinned it securely to her jacket, the metal catching the studio lights with a blinding flash. For the first decade of my career, I protected children from the people who failed them. Sarah stated, her voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. But I quickly learned that the worst abusers do not just break families. They build empires on top of the wreckage. That is why I changed my jurisdiction. I am currently the head of the State Financial Audit Bureau. Connor Sterling completely froze. The furious, aristocratic bluster that had fueled his earlier tantrum vanished in a single heartbeat. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified shell. He instinctively took a step backward, bumping into the VIP barricade, realizing too late that the trap had snapped entirely shut around his own neck. Sarah opened the thick manila folder resting on the table. It was not filled with old custody affidavits. It was packed with hundreds of pages of densely printed banking ledgers, wire transfer receipts, and forensic accounting reports. For the past 18 months, my department has been conducting a deep, comprehensive audit of the Sterling Hope Foundation for Vulnerable Youth. Sarah announced, looking directly at Maya, whose mouth was opening and closing like a suffocating fish. You built a spectacularly lucrative narrative, Maya. You sold the world the heartbreaking tragedy of your missing twin sister. You paraded your fabricated grief on every major network, begging the public to help you save the orphans you claimed your sister represented. Sarah pulled a highlighted document from the stack and held it up. The public responded. Sarah continued, her tone relentless and surgical. You received tens of millions of dollars in grassroots donations. Your husband, Connor Sterling, publicly matched those funds, utilizing the foundation as a massive public relations tool. But the children you promised to save never saw a dime of that money. Maya shook her head frantically. her hands trembling so violently she had to grip her own arms to steady them. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That is not true. We built shelters. We helped them." "You built a monumental money laundering operation," Sarah corrected, her voice slicing through Maya's pathetic denial. "According to our forensic trace, exactly 90% of all charitable contributions were immediately redirected. You and your husband utilized a complex web of shell corporations to scrub the funds clean. You weaponized a fake tragedy to siphon millions of dollars directly into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. You did not run a charity. You ran a highly sophisticated illegal tax evasion syndicate designed to shield the Sterling Corporation from federal oversight." The entire studio plunged into an absolute suffocating vacuum of silence. The ambient noise of the crowd, the shifting of the crew, even the collective breathing of 30 million viewers seemed to completely stop. The sheer magnitude of the federal crime laid bare on the stage was too massive to comprehend instantly. Then the silence shattered. It was not broken by shouts or applause. It was broken by the frantic, blinding strobe of 100 press cameras firing simultaneously. The flashes erupted from the back rows like a violent lightning storm illuminating Connor, Sterling terrified retreat, and Maya total shattering collapse in a rapid, unforgiving barrage of light. The blinding flashes captured the exact moment Connor Sterling absolute arrogance evaporated. The untouchable billionaire who had spent his life believing his wealth placed him high above the consequences of the law turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He stumbled backward into the front row of the audience, his hands raised instinctively to shield his face, but there was nowhere to hide from the lens of a live national broadcast. Before Connor could formulate a single legal threat, the heavy steel doors on both sides of the studio swung open simultaneously. A dozen federal agents in dark windbreakers poured into the room, their movements sharp, coordinated, and utterly merciless. They did not care about the live broadcast. They did not care about the Washington family elite social standing. They moved in perfect formation, surrounding the stage, effectively sealing off every possible exit. Marcus Washington took one look at the federal badges and completely broke. The distinguished patriarch cracked under the pressure, instantly turning on the woman sitting beside him. He pointed a trembling finger at Patricia, his voice cracking into a hysterical shriek. "It was her idea," Marcus bellowed, throwing his wife to the wolves without a second thought. "She is the one who set up the offshore accounts. She funneled the money. We were drowning in debt because of her reckless spending, and she used the foundation to bail us out. I had nothing to do with the wire transfers," Patricia shrieked, launching herself at her husband, her manicured nails clawing at his suit jacket. "You coward," she screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "You signed every single ledger. You gambled away our liquid assets, and you begged Connor to float us the cash. Do not you dare put this on me." The dignified, untouchable Washingtons were reduced to cornered rats tearing each other apart on live television as federal agents ascended the stage steps. Maya fell to her knees. Her pristine white suit was wrinkled, her perfect hair disheveled. She scrambled across the stage toward Connor, reaching out with desperate, grasping hands. She clamped her fingers around his tailored sleeve, sobbing uncontrollably. "Connor, please!" Maya wailed, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark tracks. "Call Richard. Call the legal team. Fix this. You promised you would always protect me. You have to fix this." Connor stared down at his wife with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. With a violent, aggressive jerk, he ripped his arm away, throwing Maya off balance so hard she collapsed onto the glass floor. "Get off of me!" Connor roared, backing away from her as if she were diseased. He looked frantically at the approaching federal agents, holding his hands up in surrender. "I want my personal defense attorney. I am not saying another word without my lawyer." I stood perfectly still, watching the empire they had built on my erasure burn to the ground. The studio was a symphony of absolute destruction. Sirens wailed in the distance. Federal agents barked orders, cameras flashed, and the people who had thrown me away wept in the ruins of their own greed. I did not gloat. I did not offer them a single parting word. They were no longer worth my breath. A Steadicam operator stepped onto the stage, circling me smoothly, capturing the raw contrast between my calm and their devastation. I turned my back on the screaming, weeping remnants of the Washington and Sterling families. I looked at Sarah Jenkins. She offered me a warm, genuine smile and held out her arm. I linked my arm through hers. We turned toward the stage exit. The heavy studio doors stood wide open, pouring a bright, brilliant pillar of natural light into the dark, chaotic room. We walked down the aisle together, our steps perfectly in sync, leaving the darkness, the lies, and the toxic history entirely behind us. There was no hatred left in my heart. There was no need for revenge anymore. I was finally completely free, stepping forward into a brilliant future that I controlled entirely. The screen faded to black.